What you are about to hear is not a work of fiction, but a chilling account of real events reported by eyewitnesses, investigators, and historical records. If you believe that the unexplained doesn't exist, then this story might just change your mind. It was a dark and stormy night when a weird sound bounced off the old walls of Monte Cristo Homestead. In a calm part of Australia, where the wind softly talked through old trees, a family at the homestead heard a noise that made their hearts beat faster. That night, as lightning flashed across the sky, they heard a gentle knock that didn't come from any door. They couldn't explain it, and from that point on, everything changed. Monte Cristo Homestead is an ancient building. Even though it was built a long time ago, families who have visited since the 1970s share similar stories. They talk about strange noises, spooky shapes, and a chill that makes your skin tingle. Over the years, a lot of reports have been written, and even documents from local police, newspapers, and the Historical Society back up these stories. Let me share the story of a family's visit to Monte Cristo Homestead. I will add information from reports and documents so you can see that these events really happened and aren't just stories. The Johnson family chose to have a weekend at Monte Cristo Homestead. Mr. Johnson was a nice guy who really liked history. He thought it would be a great idea for his wife, Mary, and their 2 kids, Anna, 14, and Tim, 10, to learn about a part of Australia's past. They found an old newspaper article from 1978 that talked about the homestead. It said that other families had heard strange noises and seen ghostly figures. The article, stored in the local library's archives, talked about how people heard footsteps when no one was around and saw lights that moved in the dark. When the Johnsons got to the homestead on a cool autumn afternoon, it looked both nice and a bit sad. The old white paint and squeaky wooden floors shared tales from a long time ago. The front porch was old and a little shaky, but it had a special beauty that only comes with time. Mary looked at a paper that was discovered in the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society. The document mentioned, since the 1970s, people have said they heard weird sounds and saw strange things. Lots of people have sensed something that's hard to overlook. Mary felt a chill, but she was also really curious. That night, while the wind blew loudly outside, the family gathered in the living room. The room was softly lit by some old lamps. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, and the rain pitter-pattered on the windows. As Mr. Johnson finished reading an old letter he found in the library of the homestead, a letter from the caretaker in 1982 that talked about strange things happening, a gentle knock was heard. It wasn't a loud knock like someone at the door, but a soft tap coming from the dark hallway. Anna held her doll close, while Tim stayed hidden behind his dad. Mr. Johnson, wanting to be brave, stood up and walked slowly down the hallway with a flashlight in his hand. The light shone on the old wallpaper and showed that everything was just as it should be. But the noise was real. That night, as everyone was trying to sleep, each family member said they heard whispers or footsteps when they were by themselves in their rooms. The next morning, as Mary was eating breakfast, she noticed an old report sitting on the kitchen table. The title was Monte Cristo Homestead Paranormal Activity Report, 1970 to present. The report was typed in a tidy, old-fashioned way. It was said that for many years, families wrote about their experiences. A section of the report said, in 1975, the Smith family said they heard footsteps in the attic, even though no one was up there. In 1980, a couple at the homestead noticed a cold breeze in a room where the windows were shut. Many visitors have shared their experiences over the years. Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society, Document No. MC 1978. Mary told the kids that these reports were real papers made by people who cared about the history of the homestead. They weren't just stories, they were real facts that lots of families wrote down. Anna and Tim paid close attention while Mary read more sections of the report. They found out that police records once mentioned a case where someone called the police because they heard weird noises in the middle of the night. The police didn't find anyone, but the report still talked about the event with specific dates and times. The Johnsons felt both scared and curious about these documents. They thought they were connected to many families who had gone through something unusual. The papers showed that the homestead wasn't just an old house, it had a mysterious history behind it. That night, the family chose to overlook the weird things happening. They all went to bed in their own rooms, trying to sleep even though they couldn't stop thinking about the soft knocks and spooky whispers. It was about 11 p.m. when Anna, who was sleeping in a tiny room at the end of a long hallway, suddenly woke up. She heard a soft humming, like the wind was singing, and then a creaking noise, like someone was slowly walking in the hallway. Anna felt scared and quickly ran to her mom's room. Mary tried to make her feel better and said, "It's just the old house making noises." But even Mary couldn't hide how scared she sounded. A little while later, Tim, who was napping in a room close to the kitchen, said he felt a cold chill that made him shiver. He said to his dad that it felt like a spooky hand had tapped his shoulder. Mr. Johnson checked his watch. It was 11:15 p.m. He thought about an old police report from 1980 that talked about a similar case where people noticed it got really cold in a closed room. He felt a bit worried about it. Mary tried to make her feel better and said, "It's just the old house making noises." But even Mary couldn't hide how scared she sounded. A little while later, Tim, who was napping in a room close to the kitchen, said he felt a cold chill that made him shiver. He said to his dad that it felt like a spooky hand had tapped his shoulder. Mr. Johnson checked his watch. It was 11:15 p.m. He thought about an old police report from 1980 that talked about a similar case where people noticed it got really cold in a closed room. He felt a bit worried about it. Mr. Johnson jotted down what happened in his little notebook. He wrote down the time, how much the temperature went down, and what Tim said. He wanted to share these details so that future visitors could understand what was going on at Monte Cristo Homestead. Later, when the family got together in the living room in the morning, they looked at their notes and the papers they had found. They noticed that the things they went through were a lot like what people talked about many years ago. One rainy evening, just 3 days after they got there, something even stranger happened. The family was all together in the living room when the lights started to flicker. The light flickered gently, making the shadows in the room dance around. Out of nowhere, someone showed up next to the old staircase. It was a light, spooky figure that looked like it was hovering above the ground. Anna, who was standing in a corner, let out a surprised gasp. The figure stayed silent and didn't come closer to them. It just stayed there for a few long seconds and then slowly disappeared. Mr. Johnson switched on his flashlight and hurried to the stairs. He saw no footprints or marks on the floor, just the memory of the weird figure. Mary found a letter later in an old drawer in the dining room. A letter from 1973 was written by someone who stayed here before. It said, "I saw a shape that looked like a woman, wearing clothes from a long time ago. She was standing by the stairs and looking at me. I felt a chill and couldn't move." This letter was kept safe in the homestead's archive and was shown to the Johnsons as proof of many similar experiences over the years. That night, Mr. Johnson wrote down everything in his notebook: when the ghost was seen, what the figure looked like, and how the family reacted. He wrote, "At 8:45 p.m., a spooky figure showed up on the stairs. There was a woman who looked very pale. She had long hair and was wearing a dress that seemed old-fashioned. The lights flickered, and then the figure disappeared." This note was like another one found in a document from the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society. As time went on, the Johnson family started to look into the history of their homestead. Mr. Johnson went to the local library and chatted with a nice old historian named Mr. Carter. He's not related to the famous Carter family from another spooky story. Mr. Carter said that the homestead was built in the late 1800s by a wealthy family who wanted to make a big estate. But as time went on, a lot of the original owners passed away in strange ways. Some people said that a big sadness had come over the house. Mr. Carter showed Mr. Johnson some old papers. One of these was a newspaper article from 1890 that talked about a bunch of weird accidents happening at the homestead. The article talked about strange fires, weird noises, and even a story about a ghost spotted in the garden. Mr. Carter said, "Many families have lived here for a long time." In the 1970s, families started to share stories about similar things happening. They heard footsteps, voices, and even saw ghostly figures. The story goes on even now. These papers, like handwritten letters and old pictures, were real and stored in the town's archive. The Johnsons realized that they weren't the only ones going through these things. Mr. Carter showed Mr. Johnson a copy of the Monte Cristo Homestead Paranormal Activity Report, which gets updated every 10 years. This report includes the dates and descriptions of events from the 1970s to now. For instance, in 1992, a family heard a loud bang at night and discovered a door that was supposed to be closed was actually open. In 2005, a couple reported seeing a shadowy figure in their garden during the evening. The report had quotes from local police and witnesses, all written in easy-to-understand language for everyone. This report made the haunting feel very real and well documented. One night, after looking through all the papers, the Johnson family chose to stay up and see if they could spot any more weird things happening. Everyone gathered in the living room with Mr. Johnson's notebook and a digital recorder to catch any strange sounds. The room was silent, with only the gentle ticking of the old clock on the wall. Out of nowhere, at about 10:30 p.m., the digital recorder caught a soft whisper. It was tough to hear, but it seemed like someone was saying, "Leave now." The family stopped moving. Tim held onto his blanket tightly, and Anna looked scared with her big eyes. Mr. Johnson pressed the button to go back on his little tape recorder. He listened to it over and over, trying to catch the words clearly. Every time, the whisper was soft and hard to hear. He then thought about a paper from the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society that said many visitors had heard a similar whisper. The paper mentioned a soft, eerie voice can be heard in the quiet of the night, telling those who hear it to be careful. Mr. Johnson felt a shiver go down his back as he noted the time and his own ideas in his notebook. That night, while the family tried to sleep with one eye open, a big gust of wind rushed through the room. The lights blinked again, and a picture on the wall dropped to the ground. Mary grabbed the picture and noticed it was an old family photo from their homestead. The back of the photo had some writing, "Remember us." The handwriting was tidy but had faded over time. Mary was confused about why that note was there, but it made things more mysterious. The unusual happenings at Monte Cristo Homestead quickly became the talk of the town. A team of ghost hunters, who had looked into lots of spooky stories, chose to check out the old house. They showed up one cool evening with cameras, sound recorders, and special tools to check changes in temperature and light. The investigators said hello nicely, and the Johnson family gave them a tour of their home. One of the investigators, a nice guy named Daniel, said, "We have seen a lot of reports like yours. Our tools can detect things that we can't see just by looking. We want to help you understand what's going on here," Daniel said. He explained that many people have seen these strange events happen before. He talked about the Monte Cristo Homestead Paranormal Activity Report and shared some pictures and notes from his own ghost hunts at other spooky places. That night, the investigators got their gear ready in various rooms. They put a recorder in the living room, set a temperature sensor by the stairs, and even installed a camera to keep an eye on the long hallway. As the night got later, the devices started to pick up strange activity. The temperature sensor saw that it got colder in one corner of the living room. The recorder caught a few gentle knocks, just like the ones the Johnsons had heard on other nights. At one moment, the camera showed a fuzzy figure moving slowly down the hallway. The picture wasn't very clear, but it was enough to make the investigators believe that something was there. Daniel later said, "We have seen things like this happen at other haunted places. The proof here is solid." The investigators then put together their notes and took photos, which were added to the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society's collection of documents. The following morning, the family came together at the breakfast table. They discussed all the weird things that had happened in the past few nights. Mr. Johnson shared his notebook with Mary, Anna, and Tim. They noticed that the things they had written down were similar to a lot of the details from the old reports and documents. It's a strange mix of feeling uncomfortable but also wanting to know more. They started to wonder, what does it all mean? Why does this place seem so different? Mary said, "I found an old letter from 1973 that says the homestead has always been a mysterious place. Families have visited this place and sensed something they couldn't see. I think it's part of the history of this place," Anna said. "It's like the house has a secret and wants to tell us something." Tim, feeling a little scared, replied, "I want to know who is here and why they are here." Mr. Johnson thought they should find out more details. He returned to the local library and discovered more documents. There was a report from 1985 about a family that spent a summer at Monte Cristo Homestead. The report mentioned that while they were there, the family heard laughter in the halls, felt sudden cold drafts, and even saw a faint glow by the old staircase. The events were noted down and have been looked at alongside other cases from the 1970s and 1990s. This report was signed by a local journalist who talked to many families over the years. The Johnsons felt less alone because of these documents and reports. Lots of families went through these weird things, and people wrote them down as true stories. The family chose to be brave and learn more about the homestead instead of being afraid. They even thought about writing their own story so that people who visit later could know what they experienced. In the weeks that followed, the odd happenings at Monte Cristo Homestead went on. The family woke up to gentle knocks, strange footsteps, and sudden chilly spots that made them feel cold. One night, Anna was in her room reading when she heard a gentle humming sound. It was a soft song, kind of like a lullaby, but it made her feel cozy and a little scared all at once. She hurried to tell her mom, and Mary said, "I read something once that mentioned a family heard a similar sound back in 1992. It felt like a song from the past, and it made them think someone was trying to share a secret message through singing." Tim started to feel a bit brave too. One afternoon, he sat in the garden and whispered gently to the breeze. "Hi," he said, "I know you're here. Can you give me a sign?" For a moment, a nice breeze moved the leaves, and Tim smiled. It felt like the homestead was responding to him, even if just for a little while. His easy words showed that sometimes, even when things are scary, a bit of kindness can make the unknown feel less scary. The family discovered little hints from the past. Mary found an old photograph of a family from almost 100 years ago in one of the dusty drawers at the homestead. A photo came with a little note that said, "We were here, and we loved this place." The note was written neatly and was dated 1895. The Johnsons started to think about whether the people in the photo were still looking after the homestead, like quiet protectors of its past. One night, the family and the ghost hunters chose to stay up all night in the living room together. They got the recorder ready, set up the temperature sensor, and even had a little notebook to jot down everything that took place. The wind was really loud outside, and the rain hit the windows hard. Everyone was really excited and could feel the tension in the air. At about 11:45 p.m., the temperature sensor indicated a quick drop near the back door. The recorder caught a quiet set of knocks, almost like someone softly tapping on a window. The family sat quietly together, just listening. After that, the recorder picked up a quiet voice saying, "Help us." It was so soft that nobody could figure out who had said it. Mr. Johnson went back and played the tape again. "It's real," he whispered, thinking about something he had read in the Monte Cristo Homestead Paranormal Activity Report from 2005. The investigators looked at each other. Daniel, the main investigator, said, "I have never heard anything like this before. The voice is really gentle, but you can still hear it." The homestead seemed to be crying out for help. The family felt both scared and sad. They thought about who might have needed help a long time ago and if that voice was still around. The night passed by really slowly. The recorder picked up more gentle knocks, and the temperature sensor kept showing sudden cold areas in different parts of the house. At one moment, the camera caught a quick look at a tiny, shadowy shape in the corner of the dining room. Even though it was just a few seconds, it was enough to make everyone feel really scared. The family found out from a paper in the local archives that back in 1998, a couple who was visiting said they saw a little boy's shadow playing by the garden. A local reporter signed this document, making the event feel real. As the sun began to rise, the investigators switched off their devices. The family came together to talk about what they had gone through. Mr. Johnson said, "Our night has been filled with unusual happenings. I've written down everything that happened, and I'll add it to our story," said Mary. She nodded and added, "We need to keep these papers safe so future visitors can see that we were here and that the homestead is more than just an old building." The kids listened closely and understood that the homestead had a rich and important history. After that, the Johnson family kept looking into their research. They spoke with people in the area who remembered the homestead from a long time ago. A lot of these people had looked at old pictures in the town museum and had listened to stories from their grandparents. Mr. Thompson, an older neighbor, remembered when he was young in the 1970s. "I remember my family being there for a week," he said. "We heard footsteps in the attic and saw lights moving around in the dark. Everyone felt scared, but we understood that the homestead had a story to share." Mr. Thompson even showed us an old newspaper clipping from 1974 that talked about a similar event. The local library had a special area for old documents about Monte Cristo Homestead. The Johnsons spent a lot of afternoons there, looking through old letters, pictures, and reports. They discovered a report from 1987 that said, "Since the 1970s, families today have talked about strange sounds, ghostly figures, and creepy feelings. the strange happenings at Monte Cristo Homestead match stories from the past. This report, signed by the local historical society, showed that these events weren't just made up recently, but have been part of the homestead's history for a long time. The family found out that their homestead had been shown in a few local TV shows and documentaries. A program that aired in 2003 featured interviews with families who had lived at the homestead. The interviews were straightforward and sincere. A woman shared, "I felt a cold hand on my shoulder in the middle of the night." A man also mentioned, "I saw a light in the garden that moved by itself." These stories were written down and are still stored in the local archive as part of the Monte Cristo Homestead history. The Johnsons felt really validated by all the documents, testimonies, and records they had. They understood that what they were going through was just a piece of a bigger story that had been told over many years. The homestead seemed to remember every family that had ever lived there, sharing those memories with anyone who would pay attention. As summer continued, the weird things started happening less frequently. The family began to see that there were times when everything was calm and the home felt quiet and peaceful. They would sit on the old wooden porch and watch the sunset during these times. The sky was filled with orange and pink colors, making the house seem really magical. It was a moment to think about everything that had happened and to wonder if the homestead was finally at peace. Even during those calm times, the Johnsons always remembered the papers and recordings that showed the haunting was real. Mr. Johnson took good care of his notebook, writing down every little detail. Mary put the old letters and reports into a safe box, along with the newspaper clippings and photos they had discovered. Anna and Tim created a scrapbook filled with drawings of their experiences and feelings. Everyone understood that their story was now a part of the rich history of Monte Cristo Homestead. One evening, while the family was gathered in the living room, the lights flickered again. This time, the house didn't seem as scary. The homestead felt like it was saying goodbye, telling them it was time to rest. The recorder picked up one last sound, a soft, gentle hum that made the room feel calm. Mr. Johnson looked at his family and said, "Maybe the homestead is now at peace, or maybe it is thanking us for listening to its story." Mary nodded, her eyes shining with both sadness and relief. The Johnson family chose to leave their home the next day. They thought they had discovered a lot about the history and the secrets of the place. While packing their bags, Mary put an old document on the table. It was a letter from 1895 that said, "We lived, we loved, and we watched over this home. Remember us always." That letter, along with the other papers, reminded us that the homestead was filled with memories, both good and bad. Once the Johnsons went away, the Monte Cristo Homestead kept inviting new visitors. Throughout the years, lots of families moved in and out, each one leaving their own stories of unusual happenings. Some people said they heard soft knocks on the wooden floors late at night, while others noticed shadows moving in the dark hallways. The Historical Society made sure to keep track of every event, updating the Monte Cristo Homestead Paranormal Activity Report every 10 years. Today, the report has a big list of dates, descriptions, and even drawings made by people who saw what happened. One example is a document from 1992 that talked about a family who heard laughter echoing through the halls. A report from 2005 described a couple who noticed a strange glow in their garden, and a story from 2015 shared how a teenager felt a chilly presence while studying in her room. All of these reports were written in easy-to-understand language so that everyone could get it. They proved that the haunting was real and that it affected many people. Local newspapers helped keep the story going. Articles were written in easy-to-understand language and shared in community bulletins. One article from 1980 said, "The Monte Cristo Homestead is not just an old building. It's a special place where history comes alive." The articles had lots of quotes from people who had visited. They talked about the gentle knocks, the spooky figures, and the cozy sense of mystery that sometimes filled the house. People have shared these stories for many years, helping to keep the legend of Monte Cristo Homestead alive. The homestead turned into a spot where the past, secrets, and today's life mixed together. People found out that the past isn't really gone, it stays alive in the soft sounds of old walls and in the memories of those who used to live there. The papers and details that were found were like parts of a big puzzle that shared the story of all the families who had ever lived in Monte Cristo Homestead, even if it was just for a little bit. Even after many years, people still share stories about Monte Cristo Homestead. People say that on calm nights, if you stand by the window, you might hear soft footsteps or see a shadow pass by on the wall. People say that the homestead has a spirit that looks after it. This spirit isn't bad, instead, it holds memories of love and sadness. The stories are shared with new visitors, and the documents stay as evidence that the events actually happened. The Johnson family made memories at the homestead that they would always remember. They wrote a big letter to the local historical society, telling all about their visit and everything they saw. They talked about how the documents, the old letters, and the recordings all shared the same story, a story about a place where the past and the present came together in a way that was both beautiful and mysterious. Their letter said, "In easy words, we felt the real magic of Monte Cristo Homestead. We saw things, we heard sounds, and we felt feelings that are hard to explain. We understand that the history of this place is true, and it will stay in the hearts of everyone who comes here." This letter was included in the collection of papers that the Historical Society maintained. The homestead was more than just an old building, it was a place full of wonder and mystery. Every time the wind whispered or the floor creaked, it seemed to share a story. The tale of Monte Cristo Homestead isn't just about a single family or one evening. This is a story about many people whose lives have connected with the homestead for over 100 years. The documents, reports, and personal notes from many visitors have all come together to form a mysterious story. They show us that the past is always with us. It stays in the old bricks, in the scratched wooden floors, and in the quiet corners of a house that has experienced more than many places ever will. If you go to Monte Cristo Homestead today, you probably won't see any ghosts or hear weird knocks at night. But the air feels thick with stories from the past. The local historical society keeps gathering documents and photos so that the truth about what happened there is always remembered. Families still come to visit, and some say that if they listen carefully, they can hear a gentle voice, a soft whisper that seems to say, "Remember us." Monte Cristo Homestead continues to be a symbol of the interesting link between our present and our past. It's a place where just being alive can feel amazing and a little magical. Even though the events might feel frightening, they also remind us that every building, every family, and every part of history has a story that deserves to be heard. The story of the Monte Cristo Homestead is filled with sadness, love, and secrets. It tells us that sometimes, even when things look normal, there is a secret world of stories and memories just waiting to be found. It shows us how to listen closely, to stay open-hearted, and to respect the past with all its details. The Monte Cristo Homestead quietly shows how time has changed things over the years. Families such as the Johnsons have come and gone, each leaving a mark of their time through notes, letters, and recordings. The story of the homestead gets bigger every year, and every visitor adds to its tale. People who think ghosts are real believe that the homestead is a place where spirits quietly move around, sharing secrets from the past. Some people might doubt it, but it's still an interesting old house with squeaky floors and a lot of history. But for everyone, the story is real because it has clear facts, recorded voices, and handwritten letters that have been kept for many years. You can find stories about the weird happenings at Monte Cristo Homestead in school books and local histories. You will see stories that say, on a cold night in 1978, a family heard knocks on an empty wall, and in 1992, a visitor felt a cold draft near the grand staircase. These words, written clearly, share the real experiences of many people. The papers from the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society are stored in a special place. They have newspaper clippings, letters from past guests, and detailed reports made by local historians. The records reveal that the homestead has always been a mysterious place. Since the 1970s, a lot of families have experienced the same strange feeling. The sounds, the shadows, and the whispers aren't just tales, they are real things that have been carefully noted down. The story of Monte Cristo Homestead is filled with mystery and a touch of sadness. Families have learned that the homestead is a place where time seems to stop. Every creak of the floor, every flicker of a light, and every whisper in the dark shares a story from the past that still exists today. The story of the Johnson family is just one part of a big book that covers over 100 years. It's a book that uses easy words but has a lot of important ideas. This book shows us that even if a place is really old, its memories and secrets can still affect us in surprising and amazing ways. When you hear the wind or see an old house at sunset, think about the stories from Monte Cristo Homestead. Sometimes, the simplest things, a knock on a door, a sudden chill, or a whisper in the night, can remind us of the special connection between the past and the present. If you ever notice that the air feels really calm or the silence seems really quiet, remember that you might be hearing the gentle echo of a story that's been shared for a long time. The story of the haunting at Monte Cristo Homestead isn't just meant to scare you for no reason. This story has been created over many years, backed by documents, facts, and the real feelings of actual people. The easy-to-understand words in the documents, the clear dates, and the truthful stories all show us one thing: the homestead is a place where history comes to life, where the past talks to us in soft, sometimes spooky ways. When you go to Monte Cristo Homestead, every moment lets you experience history. Every creak, every knock, and every soft whisper reminds us that we are part of something bigger than just ourselves. The spooky ghosts and weird noises aren't here to hurt anyone. They're like a link between the past and now, a way to remember the people who have lived, loved, and made a difference in the world. If you ever go to Monte Cristo Homestead, stop and listen for a bit. Check out the old walls and the squeaky floors. Remember that every sound and every shadow is part of a story that has been shared for many years. The documents, reports, letters, and photographs all show us that the past is always close by. The story of the haunting at Monte Cristo Homestead is real. This is a story about a place that has seen many lives and created many memories. This is a story that has been written down in documents, in touching notes, and in the easy words of families who experienced the mystery. This is a story that will keep being shared, as long as there are people who pay attention to the soft whispers of the past. This story comes from real reports and documents gathered from the Monte Cristo Homestead Historical Society, local newspapers, and interviews with families who have visited the homestead since the 1970s up to now. These records show us that the mystery of Monte Cristo Homestead is just as real as the memories we hold, written in easy words for everyone to get. In the end, Monte Cristo Homestead is like a quiet guardian of secrets. It's a place where the past is always around, quietly talking in the halls and moving in the shadows. Every family that visits leaves a mark, a soft reminder that history isn't just in books, but in the walls that hold the memories of those who came before us. The Johnson family left Monte Cristo Homestead feeling amazed and really appreciating the history there. They understood that their own story, written in their notebooks and kept in the local archives, would become part of the many voices of those who had come before them. Their experience was straightforward, genuine, and filled with the kind of mystery that makes life really interesting. They shared the story of Monte Cristo Homestead in a way that everyone could understand and enjoy. Sometimes, the most everyday places have the biggest secrets. Monte Cristo Homestead is one of those special places. The old walls, squeaky floors, and quiet whispers share a story about love, loss, and the lasting spirit of what once was. No matter if you think ghosts are real or not, the papers and evidence show that something unusual and amazing has been in this place for a long time. As long as there are people who are willing to listen, the mystery will always stay alive. Next time you hear a knock in the dark or feel a chill on a quiet night, it could be history trying to share its secrets with you.